Welcome one more day to Space in Harmonia. And as I promised, here you have one of the first short, quick videos. This is the first in a series in which I will be speaking about the nature of love, which is kind of dual, because sometimes love can be liberating, it opens our heart, but most of the time the types of love we feel are very deceptive. We attach ourselves to things, unhealthy relations, to delusions of the mind. So what is love? Why one force which supposedly is univocous, universal, can generate so many different impulses and phenomena? This is something known since antiquity. There are very deep teachings about it, but very few are willing to dive deep into the nature of love. Even in Greece, there were different concepts to name different types of love. There was the so-called Eros, the erotic love of passions that is based on attachment, especially to beauty, which is very alluring but deceptive as well. There can also be philos, which is the love of friends, family, familiar bonds in general. And there is nothing wrong with that, but that type of bond can also lead to deceptions. Sometimes people love those who belong to their family and hate those who are outside. The so-called consanguinity is a source of attachment to those who seem closer, and it has been the source of hatred since cultures emerged on this earth. Then we have the so-called agape, a type of love that was very popular in the circles of Christianity, early Christianity. Even the Nazarene leader, Paul, the Apostle Paul, spoke about agape as loving liberation, loving the help that we give to others. I would say it's a conscious love that brings us out of bondage and always seeks for the perfection of the other. It's not based on beliefs or consanguinity. It's not based on race, on ideology. It transcends all those things, at least with the background brought by the so-called universal Messiah, Yeshua, because he was speaking about a force coming from the universal Father of lights, the source, the primordial source, which is uncontaminated, beyond the world of delusions. Now it seems to me that the teaching of love brought by Yeshua was somehow prepared little by little. The ground to receive that teaching was prepared. And the masters that came before were somehow pointing to the arrival of that great teaching. And one of the greatest examples of this is the teaching of Empedocles, who was one of the successors of the Pythagorean tradition. And he pondered deeply about the nature of love, but in a very interesting way. And you'll see how this relates with the teaching of Yeshua later on. He said, originally, the universe was a perfect state of harmonia. He called a spheros, a sphere of unity where all the elements were bound together in unicity with the fifth element, ether. Earth, water, air, and fire were one with the divine fire known as ether, which is also the substance of our very true being, spirit, soul. However, there came a point in which the force of Eros, which was somehow intrinsic within that state, began to make the elements attach to themselves. So the earth cling to the earth, water to the water, air to the air, fire to the fire, and they somehow separated, generating denser and denser states of matter in which there were more separation. And this also generated the so-called hate, nekos in Greek. So Eros and nekos were the two primary forces of deception which belonged to the spell of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and war, also known as Inanna in Sumeria, Venus in Rome. She had many names, but she is somehow the representation of a deceptive intelligence that is bound to beauty, to pleasure. But it's not separate from the force of love itself, which comes from one source. Anyway, there seems to be a deceptive force that traps the immortal soul in bodies. This was the teaching of Empedocles, and later on the teachings of the Gnostics, for instance. So here comes the interesting point of Empedocles. He said that we need a sort of intelligence that makes use of the same spell of love and hate, but in a reverse order, putting back to front and front to back, so to say, so that love becomes liberating instead of attaching ourselves to deception, and hate becomes again liberating. Therefore, we have to love our true nature and seek for that pure awareness of expansiveness, which does not cling to the objects, but to pure awareness itself. In teachings from the East, they would speak about loving awareness, and this also involves separation, detachment. Therefore, we have turned hate into the sword of a spirit. Even Paul said the divine word is like a sword that divides spirit and soul, and also the ligaments from the marrow of the soul, because the soul also has different parts. The nephesh has the marrow, the bones, the ligaments, and we have to distinguish between all those energies within us so that we are not deceived by those impulses. And Empedocles expressed all this in poetry, and it reminds me very much of the teaching of the Buddha, the awakened one. He also spoke of the enlightenment coming from pure awareness. It's also known as the light of the Atman, Atta in Pali. And all this was the wisdom of self-knowledge. Centuries previous to that, there were religions based on power, justice, like that of the Israelites with Moses. But that religion didn't liberate humanity. The religion of self-knowledge didn't liberate humanity either. It was incomplete. And then, a few centuries after Empedocles, the so-called Nazarene Messiah came, and he spoke wider about the nature of love. And he said something very powerful when he was addressed by the Pharisees. He repeated something written in the Torah: you shall love Yud-Heh Elohim with all your heart, your visceral soul, and your mind. And Yud-Heh Elohim was usually a reference to those forces or intelligences of the divine emanation that were in charge of uniting the elements, the four elements, with the astral fire. But something happened that the four elements became disorganized. There was a catastrophe. And even the angels made mistakes. So only the universal man can unify the 5 elements within. This is why the Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, is the one that expresses 5 degrees of consciousness. I have spoken about this. The full union is Yehidah. Then the previous one is immortal life, Hayah. And Yeshua realized all the 5 states, and he gave the entrance to the participation in this cosmic man. He even said he was one with the cosmic man. I and the Father are one. And he said we can be one in him, in the Messiah, just as the Messiah is one with the Absolute. The Father would be the Spirit, the universal Spirit, the Son, the universal soul, and the collective body would be the branches or expressions of that collective soul, the Messiah. Therefore, that would be the key to go through the world without being deceived by the world, because we are somehow saving an aspect of the world, which is the human soul, which integrates all elements: earth, water, air, fire. We have even experienced suffering and deception. So we are transcending all that, and at the same time elevating our immortal soul, not just liberating it, but making it greater than it was. And for now, I think it's enough. There is a second video in which I will speak about different deceptive expressions of love throughout the 9 energies, which can be classified with the Sephirotic tree and also the Enneagram. But you will have to wait for that second video. Thank you very much for listening.